We are back, and as the Browns are getting out of their bye week and are heading into their game against the Miami Dolphins, I just kind of wanted to do a little bit of an analysis of how the season's gone so far, how we've gotten to this point, and what we can maybe expect from the Browns moving forward a little bit. In week one, there was a lot of anticipation and hope for the season, even with their starting quarterback, Deshaun Watson, being out for 11 games. They still thought, on paper, even with the backup quarterback, Jacoby Brissett, being probably one of the better backup options out there, this team probably has the talent to, hold steady and, keep the ship afloat until the starting quarterback returns. And in week one, it looked mostly that way. A bit of a collapse in the fourth quarter from the secondary and the offense going a little stagnant, helping the Panthers come back. But it's okay because the Browns put forth a very good last drive effort, and Cade York hitting a 58-yard game-winning field goal to make sure that the Baker Mayfield revenge game stays a fantasy. And then in the very next week against the Jets, kind of the same thing where the Browns look like they have the game all wrapped up. This time well later in the game than it was in the Panthers. But then another just collapse in the secondary, allowing Jets receivers to be wide open throughout the field. And they lose that game 31-30. That also featured a missed extra point from Cade York, who was just the hero in the previous week. Obviously, if they make that extra point, then maybe the game goes to overtime. And then who knows from there. But it was very apparent from the first 2 weeks that there is something wrong with the secondary and the defensive level. Joe Woods and something there wasn't clicking, whether it was Joe Woods' system or some of the players not being able to execute or overthinking things, or probably a bouillabaisse of both of those things. It looked ugly, but there was a rebound game against the Steelers on Thursday Night Football where the Browns, they did enough to beat a really bad Steelers team. I don't think the Browns looked necessarily great in that game, but they were better than the Steelers were. The Steelers were just not really bad in that game. So you're sitting at 2-1, thinking, okay, this is, you don't want to lose that Jets game, but you have another game against the Falcons, and then the Falcons game happens, and it's another game that the Browns, you look at the schedule and you take that one for granted, and it turns out it's very much not going to be granted. More defensive issues, this time more with the running game, although that one had the excuse of the Browns missing 3 of their starting defensive linemen. During the Steelers game, Anthony Walker, who wears the green dot, he got injured for the season, so he would be out. So in the Falcons, it was a little understandable to have the running defense being a little bit out of sorts. But then get to the game against the Chargers, another very close, winnable game, but the defense also got smoked on the ground in that one. And in that game, the Chargers came in with a horrible rushing offense. All of the Browns' starting defensive linemen were back. Maybe they weren't at full strength, but they were back in the lineup. And the Chargers still ran the ball all over the Browns like it was nothing. There seemed to be more. The number of carries Nick Chubb is getting has been a discussion in the early season. While I'm not necessarily concerned with the number of carries itself, I have been a little ticked with the general philosophy of the offense at times. It feels like the Browns aren't even making Nick Chubb a threat in some of the key moments of their games, which I do think they have done better as of late of doing. So I'll give props to Stefanski for doing that, for making that adjustment. But it does seem like for a while into the season, there wasn't even a threat of Nick Chubb. Sometimes a running back gets not as many carries, but you can tell that he's being presented as an option at all times. That did not seem like it was the case in some of these games, like against the Falcons and the Chargers. And then you get to the Patriots game, and that game was just a rout, the through and through. There was no really point of wherever that was going to be a win. That was a Bailey Zappi special from Bill Belichick and the Browns, and yeah, that was a rough game. Sometimes those happen to any team, but especially when you were playing the way the Browns were playing, it just kind of felt like par for the course. And then the Ravens game, again, another very winnable, very close game. This time it's a divisional matchup, so that's going to sting a little more down the road, especially if you look at where the Ravens are at, and the Browns are very much playing catch up to the Ravens right now. It's a pipe dream to think that the Browns might even catch up to them, especially considering the Ravens' remaining schedule. But again, this is where I think the tides start to turn a little bit, because we did see a bit more of Nick Chubb's involvement later in the later stages of the game. That final drive with the offensive pass interference, which was, I think it was technically offensive pass interference. I don't mind that flag so much as I did the false start one on the field goal. And then the 61-yard attempt gets blocked, and that's the game. Another disappointing one for the Browns. And if the Browns had capitalized on their Jets and Falcons game, and even their Chargers game, then this Ravens loss is nowhere near as impactful as it is. But they weren't able to capitalize, and so they left themselves zero margins for error against divisional opponents. But then the Bengals game happens. I don't know what happens to both the Browns and the Bengals when they meet up for the first meeting of the season, but whatever it is, it just sends the Bengals in a funk, and the Browns just happen to show up and play their best game of the season. That's what happened last year with the Browns and Bengals matchup, where the last season the Browns had all kinds of drama. I think OBJ was just released, and then the Browns come out and put up it was 38-7 or something ridiculous like that. But this game was pretty similar, where the Bengals, they were driving on their first drive. It looked like they were going to get points on the board, and then an interception is thrown. And then the Browns really control the game from there and never relinquish it. Again, there's this stat going around that Nick Chubb, every time he gets 20 carries, the Browns have won. Nick Chubb had 12 carries through the first three quarters, and the game was over in the fourth. That was all garbage time. So again, I don't necessarily think it's there's a magical number of carries that Nick Chubb gets to ensure the Browns win. I think it is more of a general philosophy of the Browns really being willing to use their run game as their main threat. So now at the bye week where we're at, the Browns have a stretch of 3 games in which Jacoby Brissett will be the starting quarterback, and after that, on December 4th against the Texans, Deshaun Watson will be eligible to start. I feel like the Browns should be able to beat the Texans even with Jacoby Brissett, but I would say the same thing about the Jets and the Falcons, so who knows. But as for the immediate future, the Dolphins pose a threat to a secondary and a defense in general that is shown to be a bit shoddy at times. Maybe they build off of their solid performances against the Ravens and the Bengals, and they continue that momentum into the second half of the season like they did last year. Remember last year the defense started rough in the first half, and then by the second half of the season everything kind of clicked in that defense. They were top 5 unit. If that happens again, then maybe this season can be salvaged and the Browns can win more games than they lose. But again, that's kind of an if. That's a big assumption. And the Dolphins coming in with Tua, Tyreek Hill. I think, did Jalen Waddle get an injury? I'm sorry, I haven't kept. Maybe whatever. Even if they do have Jalen Waddle or not, I think this Dolphins team poses a threat to the Browns. It's a tough, solid opponent, and the Bills the next week. I mean, I guess it does depend on how Josh Allen's injury. If that goes. But we've seen what the Bills are capable of. I know that the Bills have put in some stinkers. Losing to the Jets last week was certainly something, but we've seen the Bills be on God mode for games in the season. I think it is really more about what a team is capable of. But, to be fair, we just saw last week or a couple weeks ago with the Browns being capable of taking a really solid team in the Bengals, even without Jamar Chase, and just absolutely taking them to the woodshed. So we'll see what happens there. And the Buccaneers, they've had a really down year so far. I know they had a comeback win last week, but besides that, it's just been really disappointing to see for them, and you're disappointing for the Buccaneer fans. And it's been a rough season for the Bucs so far. So maybe the Browns can take advantage of some weaker opponents coming up. But again, I just kind of wanted to do a little video checking in on the Browns and where they're at, and it's not doing like a game recap or anything. Just kind of what the season has been, where they are now, what they can expect in the near future. And to end the season, where, again, you would think Deshaun Watson will take over as a starter, you have the Bengals, Ravens, Saints, Commanders, and Steelers. So getting half of your divisional games in the latter part of the season where Deshaun Watson comes back might be a bit of an advantage. I feel like the schedule is a little easier at the end as well. Once you get past this stretch of the Dolphins and the Bills, then, Buccaneers, again, they've been bad. Texans are a bad team. Bengals are good, but, again, we just saw the Browns whoop the Bengals, so there's that. The Ravens prove that they are good enough to let teams beat themselves like the Browns did last week, and they're good enough to, take it to the worst teams like the Saints. Then they have the Saints on Christmas Eve, the Commanders on New Year's Day, and then the Steelers to end the season, which the Steelers have just had an awful season so far. But with the Steelers, TJ Watt will probably be back by then, and I do think that the Steelers team, no matter what their record is going to be completely different with TJ Watt in the lineup on the roster. So that's going to be it for this video. Thank you for making it this far. If you did indeed watch, please leave a like and a subscribe. If you enjoyed it, let me know if you have something to say in the comments, and I will see you at the next one.